The first text came at 9:12 the next morning. Nina, payroll won't process. What password did you use? It was from my younger brother, Owen. 3 minutes later, my father texted, the insurance portal is locked again. Call me when you can. Then at 9:21, my mother sent hers. I hope you're proud of yourself. I stood in my kitchen in Chicago, barefoot on the cold tile, holding a mug of coffee that was still hot, and stared at those 3 messages until the screen went dark in my hand. For the first time in years, none of their emergencies belonged to me. That was the moment I knew I had really left. But to understand why those messages mattered, you have to understand what my life looked like before that night, before the birthday dinner, before my family finally said the quiet part out loud. My name is Nina Holloway. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the person everyone called when things started falling apart. Professionally, that made me successful. I worked in Chicago as a regional operations manager for a boutique hotel group, which meant I spent my days solving problems other people created and making chaos look organized before anyone important noticed. I knew how to fix staffing shortages, vendor failures, budget gaps, guest complaints, insurance delays, and technical disasters without raising my voice. I knew how to walk into a bad situation, take 3 quick notes, ask the right 4 questions, and leave behind the impression that nothing had ever been wrong. People at work called me calm under pressure. My family called me dependable. The truth was simpler than both of those words. I had just spent so many years carrying everything that I stopped remembering what it felt like to put something down. My mother, Celeste Holloway, is 59 and has the polished, composed smile of a woman who has spent her life being admired in rooms full of people who don't know her well enough. She was never the kind of mother who screamed in grocery stores or forgot birthdays or said cruel things in ways strangers could witness. My mother preferred subtler methods. She would praise you while shrinking you. She would offer help that was really control. She would say she was just being honest right after she wounded you, as if truth were something only she was brave enough to use. From the outside, she looked elegant. From the inside, she had to be at the center of every decision, every plan, every family moment, or she would find some quiet way to remind you that you had made a mistake by excluding her. My father, Martin, was easier to love and harder to forgive. He is 62, soft-spoken, decent in all the low-risk ways, and so deeply committed to keeping peace that he will let truth die in the hallway if it means no one raises their voice at dinner. He loved me. I never doubted that. But love without defense can become its own kind of absence. My father spent years watching my mother reshape every room she entered, and instead of stopping her, he learned to survive beside her. That may sound like weakness. Maybe it was. Maybe it was just habit, worn down into character after too many years of choosing silence, because silence was easier to carry than conflict. Then there was Owen, my younger brother, 33 years old, charming when he wanted something, careless when he already had it, and permanently described by my mother as the visionary in the family. Owen was the one expected to carry on Holloway House, our family's aging lakeside inn in Door County, Wisconsin. My grandparents built that inn decades ago, and for as long as I can remember, it was treated less like a business and more like a sacred family inheritance. White trim, blue shutters, lake wind through the trees, wedding weekends in summer, tourists in fall, old photographs in the lobby, and a reputation mostly kept alive by nostalgia. Owen loved talking about what the inn could become. He talked about expansion, branding, curated guest experiences, premium packages, architectural refreshes, outdoor fire features, boutique upgrades. He loved vision. What he didn't love were details, deadlines, payroll, permit renewals, tax notices, vendor disputes, refrigeration failures, or the ugly little facts that keep a business alive between beautiful ideas. That's where I came in. 3 years before my birthday dinner, a storm tore through the shoreline and nearly buried the inn. Flooded basement, damaged kitchen, insurance delays, angry vendors, cash flow collapsing at exactly the wrong moment. Owen had already stretched them thin with half-finished upgrades and expensive design choices that made great conversation and terrible balance sheets. The bank wanted a guarantor for an emergency bridge loan. Owen's credit wasn't strong enough. My father's finances were tied up and messy. My mother called me in tears and said the sentence that had trapped me in one form or another for most of my life: we would never ask if it weren't family. So I signed. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was about protecting my grandparents' legacy. I told myself that once things stabilized, everyone would understand what I had done. What actually happened was much simpler. I became the invisible beam holding up the house, and once people get used to the roof not falling in, they stop asking what's keeping it there. At first, it was little things. My mother forgot the vendor login, so I reset it during a lunch break. My father couldn't find the insurance file, so I reorganized every document on a Sunday afternoon while eating crackers over my kitchen counter. Owen missed a payroll deadline because he was dealing with 10 fires at once, so I logged in from my apartment close to midnight and fixed the withholding issue before his staff noticed something was wrong. Then it became bigger things. I covered an emergency refrigeration repair on my own card. I paid a tax penalty no one told me about until the notice was already overdue. I corrected a liquor renewal issue while sitting in the back of a strategy meeting at work, pretending I was checking notes. I handled vendor disputes, staffing gaps, software problems, insurance renewals, and cash flow emergencies as if they were natural extensions of my own life. No one sat me down and asked me to become the second operating system behind the family business. It happened the way these things always happen: one favor at a time, one urgent call at a time, one "you're just better at this stuff than we are" at a time. The worst part was not even the work. It was how invisible it became. My effort had no name in that family. It was treated like plumbing or electricity, important only when it failed. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, after I had paid for half the groceries, driven 4 hours with pies in my trunk, fixed a staff schedule for the inn, and helped my mother pull together dinner for 20 people, she smiled down the table and told everyone she was just so relieved Nina finally found a career that suits her temperament, because I had always been better at supporting roles. Everyone laughed lightly, the way people do when they sense something ugly, but hope politeness will cover it. I laughed too. Then I washed dishes alone and drove back to my hotel in silence. That was the pattern. I carried the weight, and she narrated my life as if I were lucky just to be near the center of hers. By the time summer came, I had started to understand something that scared me more than exhaustion. My family did not just rely on me. They relied on the version of me who never said no. The moment I finally understood that my family was not just leaning on me, but actively shaping my life around their needs, came on a Tuesday in June in the lobby of the Ashbury Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. I had spent 10 straight days preparing for a property review with 2 investors and our COO, the kind of meeting that could decide who got pulled into the next level of leadership and who stayed where they were, doing excellent work while someone else got promoted for knowing how to be seen doing it. I had every number memorized: occupancy trends, labor ratios, renovation timelines, guest retention metrics, seasonal projections, staffing forecasts. I knew exactly where we were strong and exactly where we were bleeding money, and exactly how I was going to present both without sounding defensive or afraid. I was standing beside a display of architectural renderings, halfway through explaining the phased redesign of our conference level, when I saw my mother walk through the lobby doors carrying a glossy gift bag with tissue paper sticking out of the top like she was arriving for brunch instead of stepping into my workplace unannounced in the middle of one of the most important afternoons of my year. She smiled the second she spotted me. Not apologetically, not uncertainly, warmly, proudly, as if she had done something sweet. One of the investors turned to look at her. My COO glanced at me with that corporate half-expression people wear when they're trying not to react to something that has already been noted internally. My mother kissed my cheek, handed me the gift bag, and said in that bright public voice of hers, "I was nearby and thought I'd surprise you. Don't work too hard, darling. You're coming back to the inn eventually anyway. Family always comes first." She laughed lightly after she said it, as though it were charming, as though it were obvious, as though a 15-year career in hospitality leadership was just a little decorative thing I had built to keep myself occupied until the family needed me full-time. I remember the investor smiling in a stiff, polite way. I remember my own face staying composed because I had trained it to do that years ago. I remember finishing the walkthrough, answering every question, hitting every point, and still knowing in my bones that something had shifted in that room the moment my mother suggested my real future belonged somewhere else. 3 weeks later, I was told I was highly valued, widely respected, and not quite the right fit yet for the senior director role. No one mentioned the lobby. No one had to. That night, I went home, set my purse on the floor, and sat down on the tile in my kitchen without even taking off my heels. I stayed there for a long time, staring at my refrigerator as if it might explain something to me if I looked at it long enough. The truth, when it finally came, was not complicated. My mother had not interrupted my work because she thought it would ruin anything. She had interrupted it because the possibility that I might be involved in something more important than her arrival had simply never registered as real to her. In her mind, my life remained permanently adjustable. My job mattered until family called. My plans mattered until the inn had a problem. My schedule mattered until someone else wanted access to it. I had spent years treating that pattern like an annoyance, like emotional weather, like one of those difficult things families survive by quietly adapting to. Sitting on that kitchen floor, I realized adaptation had become surrender, so gradually I had barely felt it happening. 2 weeks later, the email from Astor and Reed Hospitality arrived while I was eating a sad desk salad and clearing out old messages between calls. At first, I thought it was a networking inquiry or some generic recruiting reach out, something flattering but not serious. Then I opened it and read the subject line again. Vice President of Operations, San Francisco. Confidential inquiry. I actually laughed once under my breath because it felt absurd, like the kind of thing that happened to women in movies right before they dramatically changed their lives with a soundtrack behind them. But I replied. Then I interviewed. Once over video, once with the COO in person when she flew to Chicago. I told no one in my family. I barely told myself. I moved through those weeks like someone carrying a lit match inside a closed hand, careful not to let the flame go out, and even more careful not to let anyone see it. The interviews were the first professional conversations I had ever had where I did not feel the need to make myself smaller to seem manageable. They asked me about systems, crisis response, leadership, multi-property transitions, staffing philosophy, vendor accountability, guest experience recovery, budget repair after operational failure. They spoke my language. They listened when I answered. They did not tilt their heads sympathetically when I used the word ambition. They did not ask if I worried about balance. They did not frame my competence as a personality trait. When the formal offer came in September, I read the salary twice, then the relocation package, then the title again. Vice President. Not coordinator. Not director. Vice President. I accepted 48 hours later from my car in a grocery store parking lot because I could not bear the idea of taking that call from my apartment, the same apartment where so much of my life had already been colonized by other people's emergencies. The first person I told was Tessa. We met at a wine bar after work, and I slid my phone across the table so she could read the offer letter herself. She looked up at me, blinked once, and said, "Good. Now leave before they turn your whole life into a service contract." I laughed, but not because she was wrong. We both knew she wasn't. I told her I hadn't informed my family yet. She said that was the smartest thing I'd done in years. Then she asked what I was going to do about the inn. That question had been following me for days already, quiet and steady. The existing bridge arrangement I had guaranteed was set to expire at the end of October. Renewal would require a new signature, mine. The bank had already reached out once about next steps. Owen had started circling the subject in his usual way, casually at first, then with increasing urgency, dressed up as optimism. He kept saying things like, "Once we get through this next season, we'll be in a totally different position," which was the financial equivalent of promising the weather would improve if I just kept standing in the storm. I met with the bank 4 days later during my lunch break and told them I would not be extending my personal guarantee under any circumstances. I was calm, specific, unapologetic. The banker nodded like she had expected this call months ago. When I walked back onto the street afterward, The city looked the same, but my body felt different, lighter and shakier at the same time, as if some internal beam had shifted and I was still learning how to stand without it. That same evening, I opened a spreadsheet and started listing everything I had quietly covered for my family over the past transfers. Emergency vendor payments, insurance shortfalls, repair costs, filing fees, bridge coverage, every last invisible contribution. Not because I planned to make a scene, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed the truth somewhere outside my own head. I needed proof that I had not imagined the scale of what I had been carrying. And then there was my birthday dinner. I had booked the private room at a rooftop restaurant in Chicago weeks earlier, before I even accepted San Francisco, because some part of me already knew I needed one evening that belonged entirely to me. 30 guests, my friends, my colleagues, people who knew me as I actually was and not as the version my family found most convenient. I invited my parents and Owen too, but only as guests. Not planners, not hosts, not people with a say. My mother noticed that immediately. She called to offer centerpieces. I said the restaurant handled florals. She asked about speeches. I said there was no program. She asked for the guest list. I said it was mostly work people and friends. Beneath every question was the same deeper one she never asked directly. Why am I not in charge of this? And for the first time in my life, I kept answering without leaving a door open behind the answer. I didn't know exactly what would happen on my birthday night, but by then I knew one thing with perfect clarity. Whatever happened next, I was done letting my future be negotiated in rooms I had paid to build. I arrived at the restaurant 40 minutes early because some habits are so deeply wired into me, they no longer feel like choices. The private room sat high above the river, all warm amber lighting and glass walls reflecting the city back at itself, beautiful in that polished Chicago way that makes even ordinary conversations feel slightly more important. The candles were already lit, the menus neatly placed, the wine glasses catching the light in little gold flashes. 30 seats. My seat faced the entrance, because after years in operations, I like to see who's coming before they reach me. I walked the room once, checked the place cards even though I had already checked them the day before, adjusted a chair that didn't need adjusting, and stood by the window for a second looking down at the traffic below. I remember thinking that the room felt steady. It felt like mine. That mattered more than I realized at the time. My guests began arriving in twos and threes, and with every new voice, every hug, every laugh, the room became more solid around me. These were my people, colleagues who had seen me hold broken systems together without flinching, friends who knew the difference between my calm and my exhaustion, people who understood my life because they had watched me actually live it. Mara from finance brought a ridiculous birthday card signed by half the operations team. Mrs. Keene from my building handed me a small wrapped box and told me, with total sincerity, that she considered me the most competent young woman on the entire 6th floor. Tessa arrived wearing black, carrying herself with that relaxed alertness she gets when she suspects a situation may turn chaotic and wants front row seats if it does. She hugged me, took one look around the room, and murmured, "You did good." I smiled, but underneath it, I was holding a quiet tension I did not want to name. Not fear exactly, more like the awareness of weather before it breaks. My parents and Owen arrived last, which somehow felt inevitable. My mother swept in wearing ivory silk, elegant and slightly overdressed, the kind of outfit that suggested she had not come merely to attend, but to be noticed. My father looked tired in a navy blazer, as if he had already spent the day managing something he couldn't name. Owen had the polished look he put on when he wanted to appear competent. Expensive watch, confident shoulders, smile just a little too practiced. The first thing my mother did was scan the room for familiar faces. She found none. I watched that land in her posture, just a flicker, just enough for me to see it. She recovered instantly, of course. She always did. I greeted them, kissed my father's cheek, introduced them around, and seated them with Tessa and two of my coworkers, partly because I trusted Tessa and partly because I wanted witnesses near the blast radius if the evening shifted. Even then, I still thought maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the candles and the city and the simple fact of being surrounded by people who knew me as more than a family resource would keep the night clean. For the first hour, it almost did. Dinner was genuinely lovely. People told stories from work, laughed over old travel disasters, compared terrible conference coffee across cities, and made me feel celebrated in a way that had nothing to do with performance. I could feel myself relaxing in small increments. My mother, meanwhile, kept trying to locate a center of gravity that would tilt toward her. She asked one colleague how long she had known me before Nina got so serious. She told another that I had always been gifted, even if she did need a lot of direction when she was younger. She steered one conversation toward the inn, another toward family obligations, another toward how hard it is when children get so ambitious they forget where they come from. None of it quite landed. The people in that room knew me too well. My coworkers had watched me solve problems worth 6 figures before lunch. My friends had heard too many late-night stories to mistake my mother's polished little revisions for truth. The room never moved toward her. And that, more than anything, is what unsettled her. Dessert arrived at 8:34, and at 8:41, the candle on my cake was lit. Everyone sang. I smiled, leaned forward, and blew it out while 30 warm faces looked back at me. For one brief, almost painful second, I let myself believe that might be enough, that I might get through the night with nothing worse than a few loaded comments and a tension headache. Then my mother stood up. She didn't tap a glass or ask for attention. She simply rose from her chair, and because she has spent decades training rooms to respond to her voice, the conversations around us thinned and then stopped. I felt Tessa's eyes move to me before my mother even spoke. My father did not look up. Owen shifted once in his seat, jaw tightening. And my mother smiled that small brave smile she uses when she wants cruelty to sound like concern. Before the evening ends, she said, I think we should all acknowledge something. Her voice carried easily in the quiet room. Nina has always been very talented, very capable, very admired by people outside this family. There was a pause, just long enough for people to begin sensing the edge beneath the compliment. But admiration is not the same as loyalty. The room went so still I could hear the faint hum of the vent above us. My mother turned toward me then, one hand lightly resting on the back of her chair, like she was grounding herself in righteousness. It's sad, she continued, that the same daughter everyone here is praising tonight has chosen this exact moment to turn her back on the family who built her. I felt every face in the room shift toward me, not accusing, not yet, just waiting to see if I would shrink the way I always had before. She kept going. Of course she did. Once she sensed she had the center of the room, she wasn't going to stop. We have all sacrificed for Nina over the years, she said, and now when the family business needs support, she has decided her ambitions matter more. I'm saying this because truth matters. She wants applause tonight, but what she's really doing is abandoning us. Then she opened one hand toward me, like she was offering me the stage out of generosity, and said, maybe you'd like to tell your friends why you're refusing to help your own family. That was the moment something inside me changed, cleanly and all at once. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. Somewhere beneath all my planning, I think I had known she would try to turn the night into a public reckoning. What changed was that for the first time, I looked around and realized I did not have to manage the room for her. I did not have to protect her version of the story. I did not have to disappear to keep the peace. I stood up slowly, reached into my bag, and took out the charcoal folder I had packed 3 days earlier. My mother watched me with a look that was half triumph, half calculation, as if she believed I was about to explain myself in whatever small, apologetic language she found easiest to dismiss. Instead, I opened the folder and said, very calmly, I'm glad you brought up support. Then I turned slightly, enough to include the room. For the last 3 years, I have personally covered payroll shortfalls, emergency vendor payments, tax penalties, insurance gaps, repair costs, and bridge loan obligations for Holloway House. No one moved. I laid the first page on the nearest table. The current total is $317,406.82. Owen's chair scraped sharply against the floor. My mother's face lost color so fast it was almost startling. My father finally looked up. I kept going because once the truth had air, I was not going to suffocate it again. I have also handled their vendor systems, tax filings, payroll corrections, staffing emergencies, permit deadlines, and insurance renewals while working a full-time executive track job in Chicago. I held up the final paper. And since we're doing announcements tonight, here's mine. I will not be renewing my personal guarantee on the inn after October 31st. I accepted a new position in San Francisco 6 weeks ago, and I'm moving in November. That was the moment the room truly changed. Not because I had embarrassed my family, because I had finally stopped letting them narrate my life for me. I picked up my bag, looked once around the room, and said the only thing I had left to say. "I'm sorry your evening got strange," I told my guests, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. "Dessert is excellent. Please enjoy it." A few people smiled in that stunned, almost disbelieving way people do when something has been both terrible and clarifying at the same time. Then I turned and walked out before my mother could recover enough to throw one more sentence at my back. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. I could hear my own breathing in the silence. I could hear the quiet hum of the cables, the tiny shift when the car dropped floor by floor, and underneath all of that, I could feel my pulse beating hard in my wrists. Not like panic, not anymore, but like my body was finally catching up to a decision my mind had made weeks ago. When the lobby doors opened, I stepped outside into the cold Chicago night and just stood there for a second under the wash of city light, with traffic moving past and the river reflecting gold and white in broken lines. Everything around me kept going as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That was the strangest part. The world did not split open. The street did not pause. I had just blown apart the oldest pattern in my life, and the city still smelled like exhaust and autumn wind and somebody's takeout drifting from half a block away. Tessa came downstairs about 7 minutes later with my coat over one arm and the expression of a woman who had just witnessed exactly the kind of social collapse she had predicted. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knows me too well for that. Instead, she handed me my coat and said, "That may be the most beautiful financial boundary I've ever seen." I laughed so suddenly and so hard that it turned sharp at the edges and almost became crying. She took my arm and guided me toward the curb where we stood waiting for a car, and while we waited, she told me what happened after I left. My mother had tried to speak again, but apparently the room no longer belonged to her. Owen demanded to see the papers. My father told him to sit down, which according to Tessa was the first useful sentence he had spoken all evening. No one rushed after me. No one defended my mother. A couple of my coworkers quietly gathered the documents I had laid out before the restaurant staff could clear them by accident. Mrs. Keene apparently told one of the waiters, in a voice full of righteous old lady fury, that some women mistake dependence for love. I wish I had heard that myself. By the time Tessa left, half the room had emptied, not dramatically, just decisively. People put on coats, said short goodnights, and stepped away from the wreckage in the careful manner of people who know something irreversible has happened and don't want to insult it by pretending otherwise. By the time I got home, I already had 12 missed calls. By midnight, there were 19. My mother called first, then Owen, then my father, then my mother again, then two numbers I didn't recognize, which I assumed belonged to relatives who had already heard some edited version of events. I didn't answer any of them. I took off my earrings, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and stood in the dark of my apartment without turning on the overhead light. The city glowed through the windows in soft orange blocks, and my reflection looked back at me faintly in the glass, smaller than I felt and older too. I poured myself a glass of water, drank half of it, and sat down on the floor with my back against the couch because for some reason the floor felt more honest than furniture. My phone lit up again and again beside me, like something trying to summon the old version of me back into service. I watched it flash, then dim, then flash again. At 12:14 a.m., my father sent the first text that mattered. I should have said something sooner. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the rug and let the room go quiet around me. It helped a little. Not enough to heal anything, but enough to name the emptiness clearly. For once, someone in my family had admitted that silence was not neutrality. It was a choice. The next morning, the real messages began. Not emotional ones, practical ones. That told me everything. Owen texted at 9:12. Payroll won't process. What password did you use? My father texted 3 minutes later. The insurance portal is locked again. Call me when you can. My mother's message came after that. I hope you're proud of yourself. I stood there in my kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, holding a mug of coffee that was still hot, and stared at the screen until it went dark in my hand. That was the moment something settled fully inside me. After all the speeches, all the accusations, all the language about betrayal and family and sacrifice, the first thing they needed the morning after was access. Passwords, portals, process. That was my role in its purest form. Not daughter, not sister, infrastructure. I wasn't even angry then. Anger would have required surprise. What I felt instead was a hard, clean sort of recognition. They were not grieving the relationship. They were discovering the cost of losing the labor. I didn't answer right away. Around noon, my father sent another message. I found the emergency file you made. I didn't realize how much you were handling. That one nearly undid me. Not because it fixed anything. It didn't. But because it was the first honest sentence he had offered me in years. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at those words while the coffee in my mug slowly went lukewarm, and I thought about all the things I had made look effortless for them. The labeled folders, the payment schedules, the vendor contacts, the passwords saved in the encrypted system they never bothered learning because I was always there. My invisibility had been built from competence. I had made it too easy for them not to see me. I finally wrote back one line. I hope you figure it out. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind either. It was simply the first boundary I had ever sent in a complete sentence. The next 2 weeks were a blur of resignation paperwork, packing tape, forwarded mail, and carefully measured silence. My mother left 3 voicemails. I listened to one and deleted the rest. In it, she said I had humiliated the family, that I had forced a private matter into public view, that no mother deserves what I had done to her. Not once did she mention the money. Not once did she mention the years of unpaid work. Not once did she say my new job title out loud. That, more than anything, told me she understood exactly what had happened. She had tried to reduce me in front of my own witnesses, and instead I had become visible in a way she could not control. Owen texted from a new number once, asking if I really intended to walk away when the end was finally close to turning a corner. I did not answer. Some arguments end the moment you stop feeding them, and I had finally learned the difference between guilt and gravity. Just because something is pulling on you does not mean you are obligated to fall. I moved to San Francisco in early November. My apartment was smaller than the one I left, brighter too, with a narrow view of the bay if I leaned slightly to one side near the window. The first morning there, I made coffee and drank the whole cup while it was still hot. I know that sounds like a tiny thing, almost embarrassingly small compared to everything that had just happened, but it mattered. For years, my life had been structured around interruption. Urgent calls, forgotten passwords, last-minute disasters, emotional ambushes. Even my quiet had never really been mine. Standing in that new kitchen with hot coffee in my hand and pale California light coming through the glass, I realized freedom is not always dramatic when it arrives. Sometimes it is just the absence of demand. Sometimes it is silence that does not feel like punishment. Sometimes it is your own morning staying intact from beginning to end. I thought about the birthday dinner often in those first weeks, about the candlelight and the stillness in the room, and my mother's face when she realized the old script no longer worked. And the clearest truth I carried with me into that new life was this: being useful is not the same as being loved, and a family that only notices your value when you stop serving it has been telling you the truth for years. I had finally listened. Thank you so much for staying with Revenge Story House all the way to the end. Your time, support, and every single view truly mean the world to this channel. If this story touched you, surprised you, or reminded you of something real, please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell icon, and stay with us for more powerful stories ahead. Until next time, take care, and see you in the next story.